Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I want to introduce a few of the leaders we have with us. Deputy Executive Rhonda Berry is here. Judge Wesley St. Clair. We have Highline School Superintendent Susan Enfield. We have the Chief Juvenile Prosecutor Jimmy Hung. We have the Prosecuting Attorney of King County Dan Satterberg. We have Public Defense Director Anitha Khandelwal. And also, we're joined today by two young people. Miriam is over here, and Jamari is over here. His birthday today. Aww. So, thank you. As well as Sean Good of Choose 180. We're here to unveil the roadmap to Zero Youth Detention and to announce significant first steps in my budget proposal that I'll be presenting to the County Council next week that will take us along the path to reform. The roadmap really charts our common journey to reduce the number of youth in detention and help young people and families across the region thrive. The report makes abundantly clear King County cannot do this alone. Okay? Courts, Your Honor, cannot do this alone. Law enforcement, community activists, families in crisis, no one can do this working alone. But together, we have the power to transform young lives. I want to cite two specific examples that illustrate our joint commitment and the kinds of opportunities that are there before us. I'm proposing funding for community-based organizations that help families with young people who've gotten into trouble with the law. A young person might be eligible for electronic home detention, but judges in juvenile court want to make sure there is a supportive environment around that young person in the community to provide the guidance and accountability to make it to their court appearances, or to follow through with appointments, or to take positive steps to get back on track. We will support community organizations that in turn will support families, which will help increase the options for judges in determining whether a young person can be detained or can be allowed an alternative rather than being detained in a secure environment. And this, we estimate, could reduce, this one action could reduce the average daily population in youth detention by some 10 to 20%. But better than that, King County is making investments to help young people start their lives strong and healthy. In my budget, I'm proposing $700,000 in services for youth in middle school who are experiencing behavioral challenges. We heard from communities, from providers, from families. This is one of the most important things we can do. We have to help kids pass those hurdles, to keep them connected to their school communities, to keep them from being expelled or from dropping out, becoming alienated from their peers. I'm hopeful that King County Council will agree with this proposal and that we will make it happen. We want to further reduce youth detention because we know that detention is a lost opportunity to do something positive, something that can change the trajectory of a young person's life. We aspire to zero youth detention because we refuse to accept that any kid is a lost cause. We have it within our power to keep that next young person from going down the same path, and we want to use that power. There are so many ways we can do better by young people and make our communities safer and stronger. I want to hear from the people who are assembled here at these tables. I want to hear from the community as we implement the roadmap and recognize that this roadmap, like all maps, will continue to evolve as we learn more about the world in which we are operating and the things we can do to help. The fact that we are all here together is testimony that this is a new day in King County. And with a sense of resolve and a spirit of cooperation, we are ready to make a better future for all kids. So it is my pleasure now to introduce to you a familiar face, the Chief Juvenile Judge of King County, Wesley St. Clair.
Thank you. very much. I appreciate the opportunity of being here. Excuse me. It's gratifying to see the potential that the roadmap has as I have perused it during this period of time. You know, but it's always challenging to begin the process of operationalizing principles. But the reality is, I think we have, because of the collaboration, the willingness of people to engage and have conversations, the willingness to not to be stuck in our silos, which is how we have traditionally operated. I think gives us a real opportunity to kind of create a new narrative. I'm personally very excited by the thoroughness that I see within the roadmap and its possibilities. Now, the court has been at the bleeding edge of some of these changes that have occurred over the past period of time, and I think it's our intent to remain engaged, actively engaged in a model of change. We want to change our systems from being as punitive to being one that is supportive of the youth and families and the crises that they face when they appear before us. It's within the concepts of restorative principles and restorative justice that I think the court has been operationalizing some of the changes. And it's really within that concept we've been looking at the collaborative model of how do we bring our institutional partners together. But more than just the institutional partners, how do we expand our sense of who should be sitting at the table and the type of voice they should have at the table, meaning specifically community advocates, community-based organizations, families, and youth. Let's bring the people who are most impacted by the actions that we take or fail to take as we try to devise, be a part of a new dynamic. But it also takes, we can't do it alone. This has been my mantra since I've been Chief Judge at Juvenile Court is it takes all of us. It takes the police, it takes the schools, it takes the mental health, it takes the housing, the partnerships we need. We need to look for new partnerships because the old partners don't have enough power. And really, power makes me think of, it's really a process of how do we give up power? How do we as institutions say, we're not doing a good job? And maybe by the process of us sharing power with our families and our youth and our community partners, we can create a better outcome. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I would now like to turn to the prosecuting attorney of King County, Dan Satterberg.
Thank you, Mr. Executive. It's good to be here with you, and I look at where we are in 2018 now with some degree of perspective. I've been a prosecutor in this county now for 33 years and know what it was like. I interned in 1984 at the juvenile courthouse, and it was actually not a very nice building then, and it's not any better today. I am excited that we're building a new facility because we ask the families who are in crisis in our community to come to that building for help and for answers. And as Judge St. Clair said, we don't always have all the answers, which is why we're bringing in community partners to help us with this. But the building in its present state, and really the way it's been for the last 30 years, I think sends a very strong message to the families that we summon there that your problems really aren't that important to us and we don't care that much about you. It's a decrepit building. It's inadequate space for everything that it's trying to do there. And remember that more than half the work there is not criminal prosecution. More than half the work there is dependency work. So the state of Washington, through Child Protective Services, has filed an action against parents saying that because of allegations of abuse or neglect that we think that at issue is your right to parent your own children. And we ask those parents as part of this process to go through a number of remedial classes to prove that they are in fact worthy to parent their children. None of those services are at this present building, and we ask families to go all over town to all sorts of different classes to try to prove that they're worthy to be parents. I think the new building is going to have much more of a community footprint there and much more of a programmatic footprint so that at least to sign up for these classes that can be done on site. But the cases that are there for criminal matters also require some historical perspective. 20 years ago, 1996 to be precise, so 22 years ago, we filed 8,000 cases a year in the 90s, 8,000 criminal cases. About half of them were misdemeanor, about half of them were felonies. For the last 3 years, we filed closer to 1,300, from 8,000 to 1,300. We also used to have an average daily population of close to 200 people in the youth detention center. Today it was 55 on average, and that's kind of high for us. It's usually around 50 or a little below. So we've made some great progress, and I can't explain the entire mystery why numbers have fallen that much. I know part of it is that we are looking for ways to engage the community early on and to divert cases out to programs like Choose 180 that you'll hear about later. And that was a program where community partners came to us and said, help us raise our kids. And they were being kind of overlooked in a traditional court diversion process, and so we were missing 300 to 400 kids a year. Many of them were the youth of color. And so by working with the community partners in the 180 project, which started about 7-8 years ago now, we really proved that we could share our power and we could share our problems with people who had a connection. Because what we're trying to do with developing teenage brains, to really reach them, to change the way they think and the way they act, yeah, we have evidence-based programs that are good, cognitive behavioral therapy programs that have been proven to work. But what I think really works is when there's a credible messenger sitting across the table, a connection with an adult who cares about you and asks about what you want to do with your future and helps you get there. And that's what we're seeing through a lot of the programs that you'll hear about today. So just remember this, that about 92% of the cases, the criminal cases that come into the juvenile courthouse in our county, 92% of them will not go off to the state juvenile rehabilitation, or what they call with the juvenile prison system. Only about 8% of our cases go there. 92% will stay local. And that was an intentional decision by the state legislature to tell counties, we're going to have you keep your youth, except for the most extremely violent cases and the serious homicides and those sorts of cases, we want you to keep these cases local because the legislature believes that the answers can also be found in the community that we serve. So after a 180 program, a few years ago, we started the FERS program, which is an intrafamilial domestic violence mediation service. So we're helping families who were, at a moment in time, were so afraid of their child that they called 911 for help. And they wanted help right then, not a year later when the case finally got resolved. So the FERS program takes those cases out of the system and it provides help to families immediately. A new felony diversion program that we started recently is called CEDAR, because we have FERS and CEDAR, and it's at Alder and Spruce. It's an inside joke, but everything's got to be about the trees up there. But the CEDAR program does both. For felony diversion, it engages both the menu of evidence-based programming that the court has at its disposal, and it incentivizes community engagement with a series of community groups. And to my right is Jimmy Hung, who is the chief of our juvenile division in the prosecutor's office, and I've asked him to talk a little bit about the CEDAR program and what that looks like.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Mr. Executive. So, as Dan's chief of our juvenile division, one of our kind of guiding principles is something that Dan talks about, which is, some of the most complex problems fall at the doorsteps of the criminal justice system, and the reality is we can't fix all those problems with the jail cell or courtroom. And CEDAR kind of really encompasses that principle. The other principle it really encompasses is something that Judge St. Clair talked about, which is critical towards reaching the goal of zero youth detention, which is that everyone in the system has to come together and collaborate and work with the community. And at its heart, CEDAR does that. It's really a collaboration between all the players within the juvenile court system, from the prosecutor to defense to probation to the courts, and then with the community. And really at the heart of what this program is about is how do we bring youth and families who touch the juvenile justice system and connect them with effective, evidence-based interventions and community-based interventions as soon as possible. One of the reasons why we see kids end up in our detention facility is I think, a failure of our system to respond to the needs of young people and their families as soon as possible. So I'm preaching to the choir for the people up here who work in the juvenile court system, and one of the heart-breaking things that we see is a young person who makes a mistake in our community, comes into the juvenile court system, but because our process is so slow and unresponsive, they end up reoffending because they're not getting their needs met. And so the hope of CEDAR is, how do we essentially accelerate the court process as soon as possible so that we can deliver those interventions to the families, and then taking it a step further when we provide those interventions to give the young person further incentive and benefit to follow through. And then when they follow through, the hope is that they can leave the court system with no legal consequences at all. And us as prosecutors using our discretion to dismiss cases to reward young people for engaging in a good way and turning their lives around.
Thank you. And it's also my pleasure to introduce the Public Defense Director for King County, Anitha Khandelwal.
Thank you. The Department of Public Defense is, like the executive and our community, deeply committed to Zero Youth Detention. And we believe that following this roadmap will reduce the number of young people who are detained. A couple of key things. First, it strengthens community-owned services, which help young people stay connected to their communities and help them succeed. Those communities are invested in their children and want to see them do well. For young people who are system involved, it funds concrete and specific programs, it funds evidence-informed approaches that will help kids stay out of detention. And so the funding for electronic home detention, for example, we're confident was going to result in reduced use of detention. And programs like CEDAR will allow children to emerge from the system without the harm of a felony conviction. And the roadmap supports families. And as we all know, families are the key to youth success. Again, evidence shows that youth with strong family support are less likely to get into trouble and to offend, and so supporting those families is critical, and that's what this roadmap does. The plan addresses head-on issues that lead kids to detention, and it resources services that our attorneys, on an ad hoc basis, often try to cobble together when we're advocating for young people who are in the system. So those services will be resourced so that they're widely available to all kids. We know that diversion, family support, mental health support, and job training make a difference in every young person's life. And this roadmap marks the development of a pathway towards a pathway that better supports youth and their families and their communities. It's a meaningful shift and a systemic change in the right direction. We've been involved with it every step of the way, and we fully support it.
Thank you. One of our strong partners is the Highline School District. I'm pleased to introduce the superintendent of the Highline Schools, Susan Enfield.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today. Before I became a school superintendent, I was a high school teacher in California. And I learned early on in my career as an educator that how we worked with our young people when they made a bad choice or a mistake sent a profound message that could stay with them long after that mistake was rectified. And so when I became a superintendent, I felt it was incumbent upon us as the adults in the community, and the school system in particular, to examine our discipline policies and practices and to look at the systems we had in place to build strong, healthy relationships, student to student, student to adult, adult to adult, and make sure that we were doing everything possible to keep our students in school. And so back in 2012, we took on the very daunting work, it is not for the faint of heart, I have told people many times, of working to really transform our discipline practices and policies and work to create a culture in Highline Public Schools where we really only wanted to put a student out of school if we absolutely had to for legal and safety reasons. We were not going to put them off campus for defiance or for minor infractions, because I just believed, without any statistical analysis needed, that a student being pushed out of school for days, weeks at a time, and the number of students leaving our system without a diploma, there was a correlation there. And I don't think you need a statistics degree to figure that out. One of the things, though, that we've learned along the way in this work, and it is very hard work, but it's the most important work we do, is that this isn't work that we can do alone. Because the reality is, despite our best efforts, despite the absolute dedication of the adults in Highline Public School, who work each and every day to know every child by name, strength, and need, things happen. And we have to put the safety of our adults and students in our schools first, and so there are times where we put children out of school for very justifiable reasons. But where I continue to lose sleep is what then? And that's why this is so incredibly important, because when we began this work back in 2012, one of the things that we spent much time, probably not enough time, talking about was when we have to make the hard decision to put a child out of school for discipline reasons and safety reasons, where do they go? What if home is not a place of refuge and support and counseling? Where do they go? And so what is so important about this roadmap is it will really strengthen the partnerships that we have in the community so that our schools can be places where adults and students alike thrive, because we cannot do this work alone. I only wish we had had the roadmap 5 years ago when we started this work, but I am thrilled that it is here today. And speaking, I think, on behalf of my colleagues in public education across the county, we're grateful for the leadership in this room that has taken this on and said that we will come together as the adults in this community and wrap our arms around our young people and commit to their success. So thank you.
Thank you. I introduced him earlier, and I'd like now to turn to Sean Good of Choose 180.
Thank you. It's a really cool honor to be here and share space with each and every one of you. As I get started, I want to first highlight the fact that 2012 is a special year, Susan, for you. It's also when this journey in sincerity began with champions in the community from groups like EPIC and the Coalition for No Youth Jail. And I think it's important that as we have a conversation around Zero Youth Detention, that we remember that there's so many different people who are part of our community that have been catalysts in getting us to this place where we have this document in front of us. And I also think it's important that we highlight the incredibly hard work that folks like Claudia and Kelly and Rhonda and the rest of the folks on the county Zero Youth Detention team have done to produce this document in partnership with folks in the Public Defender's Office and many others that are sharing space with us right now. It's really special to be a community voice in this space, but it's also important that you know that being a community leader and a man of color, that my opinion and our opinions are not monolithic, and many of us feel different ways about so many of the contentious topics that surround getting young people to Zero Youth Detention. So as I share, I want to own that this is a perspective that's unique to me and unique to the cause that I steward, and it may align with others, but it doesn't have to be everybody else's perspective. That being said, I'm excited because as we take on a public health approach in this county, it's imperative that we view and we understand violence as a disease. And there's no way to cure a disease in a silo, because a disease is so invasive and pervasive that it impacts across many areas of our county that are underserved because of proximity to social services that would be, if present, best needed to be able to meet that particular ailment. And as we take on this public health approach, we have to have some sort of directive that creates the framework for how we operate with one another. I get excited when I look around the tables that are here, because look at the people we have here. We have Miriam, we have Jamari, right? We have public defenders, we have judges, we have superintendents, we have prosecuting attorneys, we have executives, we have many of the elements that are necessary to produce an effective cure, because it requires authentic relationships for us even to begin to have these conversations. Relationships that transcend our particular view, and relationships that create the space for us to no longer demonize those who have been victims of an unjust system or those who have been perpetrators of that injustice. This roadmap creates an opportunity for us to come together to lay aside our personal narratives and work collaboratively for the sake of young people who are daily falling by the wayside because we have so many issues with each other that our primary issue of treating those who are of greatest need becomes the background instead of the forefront. I'm excited to be present because as I look at Miriam and I look at Jamari, I think to myself that not only have they been through this process, but they're also victorious over scenarios and situations. They're kind of like the outliers because they've made it in some respect. They're the exceptions to a, unfortunately, poorly defined rule that doesn't create opportunities for young people like this to thrive. But because of their connection to community organizations, because of their participation with practitioners who live within the community that do this great work day in and day out, they get to share space with us today and be future leaders that are leading this work forward in the future. You know, in this model, it's going to require the county and the people with the resources to really begin to fund the ER doctors, the primary care physicians, the specialty physicians that work and live and thrive and serve the young people day in and day out. And that's something else that this really speaks to. It's this model of power sharing that was really championed by Dan's office so many years ago when we began the work of Choose 180, where they said instead of paying for another prosecutor, we'll pay for a community-based solution. And so in that, it's saying we're going to take dollars that we'd otherwise use to fuel the system of injustice and reallocate those dollars to go to a community-based organization that can live out restorative justice. And the county and the commitment that Dow was making as I read through this is to do the same thing. To say we've been funding injustice, how do we fund restorative practices in a way that allows our young people to be whole, our young people to be healed, our young people to be able to sit at tables like they are today as champions of the lives that they've had the fortune to live and allow their voice to mean so much more than what it could have if it was silenced and muted because of the community that they grew up in. So my ask is that this be a terrific beginning, a wonderful launch, but let us not lose track of what is in front of us. There's a scripture that I lean on all the time in Hebrews, and it talks about running the race that's marked out before us. And when it says running the race marked out before us, it doesn't actually talk about there being an end to the race. It just says running the race marked out before us. And in Hebrews, it says, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. I might preach a little bit. There might be an offering so we can fund this later on, too. But in that, what it's saying is that if you fix your eyes on something that's bigger, something that's pure, something that's true, something that's genuine, something that has the essence of perfection within it, regardless of the imperfect variables surrounding it, if you just fix your eyes on this idea of zero youth in detention, and you look at this race that's marked out before us, then let us run with perseverance and not get weary, considering the great sacrifices not of politicians, but of young people who have been failed over and over and over again because of our issues with one another. So if we lift them up and continue to allow their victory to be our pursuit, I'm confident that this beginning today will develop into a fantastic end. And that end will be a place where we have zero youth in detention, not just because we've shifted the problem from detention to another system of injustice, but because we've come up with an authentic cure to no longer enable young people to fall, but empower them to succeed. Thank you kindly.
Amen.
So no pressure, but would our future leaders like to share some thoughts? Jamari and Miriam?
I would agree with everything that I'm hearing so far as the support system and the community and everything, because I think it plays the biggest part now, because it's like, well, I'm still young, so it's like I'm still seeing everything for myself that like you guys are all doing in and outside. And so it's like me, like what I was going through before, stuff like that, like the system and stuff, it was kind of hard for me because it was something new for me as well. And so it was like I didn't really have like the support. So it was like that's kind of how everything came into part. So it was like without the support, I didn't really know where I was going at the time. And it was like I didn't really have nobody to talk to or lead me in like the direction where I was trying to get to. And so with like community passageways, they helped me with that. And not only that, they kind of played like so far as my family too, not just me, but they got into like my house-wise with it. And so with that, I seen like a brighter side to it. And I started to, work more with them, and even spread the word so far as my friends and anybody else that's like out here who needs help or like trying to achieve something that they want to do. And so with that, I was looking at it that way because like nowadays, like literally it looks like jail is really like the easy route now. And that's where a lot of my friends and everybody else end up going off of doing everything else, because they don't have that support that they be wanting to. So it's like, with this, I say it helps, and it will help. You know, we can get more like programs like this, or even like build these programs up so that they can get the help that they need to bring us up. And yeah, something like that.
Great, thank you.
Good job.
I'm Miriam. So, in my point of view, I agree to this, but at the same time, I would like the juvenile to stay up because there is kids out here that do act like criminal crimes that adults do, and they should keep the system like that. Just keep putting all these kids that do all the bad stuff, keep them in the system. All these kids out here that keep getting arrested for over like some petty stuff makes no sense. Like all these support systems that are getting funded and spreading out, that's the big key right there, because growing up I never felt like I was wanted or needed. So I do all this dumb stuff and end up in the juvenile. But now that I'm over here a strong person till this day now, like I'm doing everything I can, having all these support systems on my back, standing strong, being independent, telling myself I could do it. That's what these kids need for themselves, to tell themselves that they could do it, and then they can make it in life. There's no need for them to be sitting behind a bar, messing up their whole entire life over some petty stuff. You're gonna sit there and regret it your whole entire life because you just got locked behind a bar. What about the education? What about your life? Like, what's the whole point of having this juvenile system over some petty stuff? Think about the actual crimes. People over here dying left to right. That's what people need to get arrested for, not sitting here going to go steal from the store. That makes no sense. So my point of view, like, I like this part, taking out the detention, but at the same time, I would like it up for all these teenagers that are doing criminal crimes that nobody could stop.
So I got a question. So is this about like the whole new building, I guess? Is this like, I mean, I see what she's saying, but like I feel like the reason like any kind of like the crimes that are happening is because people don't have like that kind of support, you know, for so far if it's a job because they got a felony or anything like that. Like I feel like that's where that kind of comes into play, because that's how like I got involved in things I was in, was because I was in school, I got into like a little petty fight and I got kicked out. And so, you know, if you're kicked out of school, you really don't got nothing else but just time on your hands. And so that's when the streets came into part. And then when I got into that, it was just like, that's just trouble. Like, I didn't have nobody tell me, oh, you need to get back into school, or you need to get back on where you was at, you need to get a job. It was none of that. So, you know, I did, like, the last thing I thought I could do was just get into it with my friends and do what they was doing, because, I mean, nothing else for me to do. But, like, yeah, there is, like, people out here that's just doing stuff just to do it, that just have nothing else, I guess you can do. But then again, I look at it because they probably got done doing 5 or whatever, got out, and, you know, the life is messed up, and I understand that fully, but that still don't give you the right to do any kind of crime at the same time. But it's like, so far as that, like, I feel like if more, like, was spread the word about, like, the programs and the stuff that's out here, like, I'm pretty sure people will try to reach out, because there's a lot that need that kind of help. And they might not say it, like me, because I was quiet at first. Like, I didn't really believe in, like, you know, mentors and people who can help me with this and help me with that. I just believe that they just, okay, you could do this, and I'm just let you go ahead and do that. Like, I didn't believe they really, like, push you in that door type of thing. And that's what they was doing with me. Like, I said I wanted to do something, and they helped me. I got back into school. I got back into sports and everything else that they kind of wanted me to. I got a job and everything else. And so, like, the stuff is out here, and it works. You just got to kind of put your mind to it type of thing. And that's what I've been doing so far as, like, my family and friends. Like, I've been trying to tell them, but, you know, if they don't really see me doing too much, then I doubt they want to do anything themselves. And so that's why I continue to work with these guys and talk to as many people as I can, because before I really didn't talk, but nowadays I see that's what you got to do in order for people to hear you. And that's what I'm trying to do now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. That was a remarkable explanation of exactly the challenges and the opportunities that are in front of us. And yeah, I mean, what we need to do, what the things I described and much more, is about trying to find ways to be able to help young people who got in the fight at school or who are having challenges at school to stay in school, to be reconciled to the school community, to get back on track. If they come into contact with the justice system, ask ourselves, do we have the capacity to create a safe place for them in the community as opposed to in detention? For those who've done something extremely serious and violent, we don't have, let's say, that safe alternative yet. We're trying to create a space that is a safe, developmentally appropriate place, but we don't stop at that. We ask, what could have been done to keep this young person from getting on that track in the first place? What can we do? What kind of investments can we make to help the next kid to not go down that same path? That is why we need to have the discipline of not less youth detention, but zero. Because for every kid, we have to ask, what can we do to help them be able to live a full and happy and productive life? Thank you for being here for that. We'd be glad to take whatever questions you might have. Oh, and I wanted to mention, yeah, Rhonda, you were not on the list to talk, but you were on the list to answer questions. And Rhonda Berry is the Deputy Executive of King County, and she stepped up to lead this effort to create this roadmap, which I think is probably unique in the country. You were aided in this by many, many, many people, but I do see in the room Kelly Carroll, who did a lot of this work, Celia Jackson from my office, and Claudia Pineda, who's here, who did a lot of work. And I'm sure there are many others here who did a lot of the heavy lifting, but thank you so much for your commitment in bringing us to this day. Go ahead.
You're welcome. I was not on the list to talk, but I will say a few things, and I'll be very brief. We have in the room as well the Director of Public Health Seattle King County, Patty Hayes. And, you know, we've talked about a lot of things today, many of which have been talked about before. A lot of them are new. So many analogies I could go with. And one of the things that I'll say is, we talk about a roadmap. If you have a roadmap of King County from 20 years ago, you might be able to get to a lot of places within the county, but there's some places that you're just not going to go because that roadmap isn't accurate any longer. We've made great strides in reducing the number of youth in secure detention right now, but with a new roadmap, we're going to go even further. And I am so excited about that. I've learned so much in the past year of leading this work. One of the first things that I heard from a community provider was, let's talk about what opportunities we've given our young people. And that's been the foundation of where I've started with this work. Public Health Seattle King County has a history of partnerships. From things like emergency preparedness, from disease prevention and control. Partnership is in the lifeblood of their work. In pursuing the path to zero youth detention, partnership is what's going to be needed, and it's about community. So we're going to be continuing to work with people who have been involved in different parts of the criminal equation. We're going to be involved with young people, their families, as they define family. There are lots of different ways to define family, and not everyone is what you see reflected on television. So I'm looking forward to that, the implementation of the roadmap. And one of the things that Miriam said to me, we were in a room, we had an opportunity to talk about some things, and, you know, I said, I'm really committed to this work. I want to be a support. I want to be a cheerleader. Miriam said, you can't be a cheerleader, you got to get in the game. And that's what we're asking you guys to do today, is to join us in the game.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very sharp. That's good. Also, Marcus Stubblefield, who's hiding back here in the corner, has been a tremendous help and guide to me and to all of us as we've walked this journey, and will continue to be. And I also see Dominique Davis of Community Passageways, another one of our strong community partners. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate it. Are there questions?
Marcus Green from the Seattle Times.
I love hearing that. Go
Not
ahead.
as much as my baby down. What would you say to those people who say that zero detention is a pipe dream and that the county is doing nothing but grandstanding?
Well, I think you'll see the results of continued reduction in the number of youth who have to be detained as we expand our community partnerships and the capacity we have for kids to be safely in the community. But the fact is that it is a long path from here to actual absolute zero youth detention, because for some of these offenses, for some of these acts, we're going to have to invest much earlier in young people's lives to help them get on track and stay on track. Dan mentioned there are 55, you said, young people in the juvenile detention today, but like 15 of those would have been at the adult jail up until a few months ago, and we had them come to the youth detention where they could get more programming, but I think maybe 2/3 of those 15 are charged with murder or manslaughter. Very, very serious crimes for which we do not have a ready community alternative that can be both safe for the youth and safe for the community. So that, it sort of illustrates the distance we still have to go. But what happened in each of those kids' lives that caused them to commit that act? What happens in the society that we can begin to unearth and correct that would change the conditions that led them to that place? And if we don't ask ourselves those hard questions and hold ourselves accountable for every single kid, we don't have any prayer of ever getting there. So we have to do this. We have to have this as our absolute, as the yardstick against which we're going to measure our actions.
I will use Miriam's quote against them. Or they stand on the sideline. Because that question is could be put to all of us in this room. Is we could be grandstanding, but at least we're setting an aspirational goal to meet. Do you want to step in the game and help us, or do you want to stand on the sideline and let all your young people pass you by? So I will go back to what Miriam said to us in that room. Get in the game.
Patricia Murphy with KUW. You've asked for, is it $4 million in funding? Is that I'm just trying to find the notes, but I guess my question is, do you expect to get it? And, because there's a note at the end of this that says, there's not a whole lot of money. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in here. So I'm curious about your.
So in the materials that everyone's been presented, there are a list of budget proposals that I have. It's funding for CEDAR. It's funding for our community-based work to help kids who are on electronic home monitoring. It's funding for things as simple as training of the staff at juvenile detention. I do expect this to receive strong support on the county council. I think the county council members are bought into the notion that we can and must do things differently, and that we've, remember what Dan said, 20 years ago, there were 4 times as many young people in detention. There have been demographic changes, there have been changes across the country, but a lot of that is because we just decided that we're going to try to do things differently. Well, as we reach these new thresholds, things get tougher and tougher, and so we want to make sure we make the investments to get us to that next threshold, to reduce the number of youth in detention who don't have to be there because we have an effective diversion program that can really help them turn their lives around and not to recidivate, for example. Or that we're able to have kids who can be on electronic home monitoring because we have more community mentors and support there to help them when they're not in secure detention. But these are things that require investment, and then not just investment, they require partnerships. This is not something government does by itself. This is something that we have to do working with trusted partners and peers in the community. And that is the same approach that we've taken to several other challenges of late. It requires a lot more work, a lot more letting go of power, but ultimately is the only way we can be effective in making further progress, especially in this area.
Simone Arizea, KNKX. Sticking on the money thing, to what extent is this new money, because these programs already exist and already have some amount of funding, with the exception of, it looks like, the new staffing for the public health approach. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how much is new.
Yeah, I
and
think
what's
most of the things you've been given here are new
Okay.
investments
Okay.
above what has been spent to date.
Okay.
And I could dig into and give you the sources for various of these. Some of it's just going to be county general fund, some of it's going to be programs like Best Starts for Kids, or possibly the mental illness drug dependency tax. But we're making significant investments, new investments, in helping youth get past the challenges of growing up and onto successful lives. And I hope that we're able to demonstrate that these investments are good, not just for the individual kids, but for the community and for the safety of all the residents of the county. I think they are. I think they will be.
Josh Kelly with Seattle Weekly. The $700,000 for evidence-based behavioral health services. The release notes that's one-time funding for 2019 through the state. So, and then it also says the county will again support legislation we reintroduced. That implies that the funding's already there, but it's one time. Next year, the county's gonna have to go back and get it again. Are
I can
there
weigh in
any
on this, but let me try it first.
equivalents from NID or elements of the general fund that could support that on an ongoing basis?
So there was legislation last year that we promoted in Olympia that would have allowed us to take funding that is now available to help young people after they've gotten into the justice system with behavioral health challenges. We wanted to be able to move that money up front and start to invest earlier to keep them from coming into the system in the first place. These are local funds that we're going to put into that very purpose, and to essentially show the legislature that this is a smarter way to invest the money. It's better for the young people, it's better for the community, and then we are going to challenge the legislature once again to allow us that flexibility to be able to use the state funds earlier in the process. And I know Judge St. Clair, you're very familiar with this, and might add some more.
It was right now, it takes, in order for state funding to be utilized per youth, it typically takes an adjudication, finding of guilt of some sort. And under our current system, oftentimes those adjudications would be 6 to 9 months after an offense has occurred and a young person has been in our system. The reality is, oftentimes there's a number of reoffenses in the midst of it, which it kind of worsens the situation, and so it doesn't give those evidence-based programs an opportunity to operate. So our goal, and we were one of the ones who put forward the bill, was to let us utilize those funds at an earlier point in time when we first contact the youth, and the bill did not pass. And I think it's great that we're going to have the opportunity to actually get some resources, but then go back to the state legislature to create a different opportunity for beginning the intervention at an earlier point in time, closer to when the event occurs, rather than 6, 9 months, sometimes a year after an event has occurred. If I could also comment that as we push along this path and we find success, we can really go back into our institutions and say, why are we doing business the same way that we've done before? We should be able to reallocate those current resources in a different way to further advance these energies and efforts. But again, that's power sharing, turf sharing that oftentimes folks are real challenged in doing. But I think this will give us an opportunity to, once we see these successes, and we're actually seeing the successes. We have 2 of them here, and there's more in the wings all the time. We just have to really give our community-based organizations and those voices and us an opportunity to institute these changes.
And in fact, with these funds, because they are our own local funds, I believe we can use them even if a young person has not come through the front door of the justice system, but perhaps has gotten in trouble at school. And so Superintendent Enfield might be able to draw on this to help someone who's having clearly a mental health challenge, or or a substance abuse challenge to get back on track and not end up being alienated from the school community. Go ahead.
So moving forward, you get your funding, everything goes swimmingly with the council. I read in here you have like a check-in with them every June. Where else along the way does the county have accountability for the roadmap?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Kelly Carroll to say a little bit more about this, but we are going to have, a ongoing conversation with the community about the progress that we're making, the places where we're being affected, the places where maybe the funds are not having intended outcomes, and that we can redirect them elsewhere. Did you want to talk, Kelly?
You know, one of the things we're going to do.
Use the mic, though. Introduce yourself first.
For the record, Kelly Carroll. One of the things we're going to be doing is a dashboard that's going to be publicly available. So not only will it be accountable to policymakers, but accountable to communities. So that's one way. Another way we're going to be doing that. Does that help?
I'll be able to check in and be like,
yep.
The community programs who are getting the money are right here.
When is that going to be stood up?
We're looking at toward late fall, early winter.
Of this year?
Yes.
Others?
Thanks.
Tyron Dixon from Seattle Times. I want to go back to Miriam and Tamara. Your stories are really compelling, but the thing that touched me the most is when you said that there weren't people around in your family's communities to tell you the right things. Can you talk a bit more about what would you have liked people to say before you got in trouble? What is it that you needed to hear to keep you on the right path, or at least to keep you out of trouble?
With me, like the way I see it, it wasn't like, cause I'm not the easiest to deal with, but I'm not the hardest. It's like, you know, you could tell me something, and then, you know, I'll just throw it in like a iffy situation type thing. But like sometimes like you gotta have that push, I guess you could say. And they wasn't like, everybody was telling me, oh, you need to get back on the field and everything else, and they'll leave it at that. Like I won't hear from them. They won't really apply. Like, you know, keep my mind on that. You know, something constant, I guess you could say. And that's just like what it was. And so it was like, even still, like I was going through school and stuff like that, and my friends, they was having everything that I didn't have. And so I was forever like, man, I kind of want what they got type of thing. And so, but like after that, like I don't even know, like what I wanted to do, I guess I just didn't have that kind of support. Like I wanted to just have like a nice job, you know, playing sports, you know, college and everything else, but I wasn't getting in between those doors. Like none was opening for me. It was like I was somewhat, because I was like, you know, high school I was kind of a bad kid, but then again I eventually grew from that. But even still then, like those doors wasn't open for me, so I wasn't really always just head on with those. But I didn't really, my mom, she did, but it was like, I guess not how I kind of like wanted her to type of thing, because I never had my dad or anything like that. And so it was like that the whole like male figure thing, like she did as much as she can, but it was like I still didn't have that, you know, that heart to heart guy type of like guy talk, you know, to keep me on like this football, you know, stuff, and like how to keep going, you know, what I need to do so far as like working out or whatever I need to do to keep that on. And like even still then, like I did have my older brother, but he was onto other stuff. And so, you know, he kind of kept me away, so, you know, I had to stay away from what he's doing because, you know, it wasn't in the right direction. And so it was like I was kind of just by myself at that time. And with that, I just said kind of just, you know, forget it. Like, I'm just going to do what I feel like I want to do type of thing. And, like, even so far as school, I didn't really hang out with too many people like that or get into too many things with, like, people because I'm a very antisocial person. Like, this, like, speaking stuff is still something new for me. But, like, in school, stuff like that, I didn't really talk as much. I guess people didn't really talk to me, I guess you could say, because, you know, he a quiet type, let's just not bother him type of thing. And that's what I had when I was in school. Like, I felt like the teacher would say I'm more intimidating and stuff like that just because the way I look and stuff like that and how I carry myself. Like, you feel like you say the wrong thing, I might just snap on you. And that's not what it was. You know, I'm just somebody who's always, like, in, like, the mind, you know, always thinking hard about, like, what do you want to do type of thing. It's not that or anything, but it's just I'm forever thinking about my next move, you know, like what I want to do next when I wake up, just, you know, everything like that. And so, you know, I didn't really have too many people, you know, tell me, like, how do I need to get where I need to go, and, like, who I need to talk to or anything like that. And so that's kind of what it was right there.
Thank you.
So, like, the thing I would have wanted to hear when I was younger was, is it worth it? I never got to hear that much. So, when I was like 12 years old, I got taken away from my mom, and that day right there just messed up my whole entire life. Like, my dad, he was abusive towards us, and I would always get bullied because of my skin color. And I thought I could be nothing in life. So when I came out here to Seattle, I was like, okay, let me just go into that bad stuff. Let me just do that bad stuff, because I never wanted to be here. I just wanted to just peace out, call it quits. But now I tell myself this, is it worth it, honestly? Because I have goals and dreams in life. And if I want to sit here and do all that bad stuff, I know I can't accomplish it. I know I'm not going to have all these people that I want around me forever. So I'm going to have the support from them now. So, and like, I keep my head up held high because of my younger siblings. Like, my mom and dad, they never had an education because they came from Africa. So I want to show them that it's worth it. You guys could accomplish your dreams in life and be something. Can't sit here and give up.
Can I just add
Yeah.
too, sometimes it's not, and I hope Jamari and Miriam will correct me if I'm wrong, but when we took on this work in Highline, I remember having all of our principals and district leaders in the room, and we had two young people, middle school and high school, telling their story about getting out of school suspended multiple times. And people asked them a lot of questions, but finally no one had asked the question that I felt needed to be asked, and your story reminded me of it. Why? Did anybody at any point during your time in school take you aside and say, what's going on? Why are you angry? Why are you getting stoned? Why are you doing what you're doing? To find out what your story is and then intervene rather than punish the behavior. And I think if we take the time to build relationships with our young people and listen to their stories, we can get so much further. Don't presume to know, ask.
Yeah. So all these big high schools, like, they don't care that much. Like, I like the school that I go to now because it's a small school and the teachers do give you the love and support that you need. But in regular high schools, it's just the teacher putting something in front of your face. Do it. They honestly, it feels like they don't even care. Just doing it for the money. Like,
That's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't know, with me, like, I feel like teachers should try and build that relationship, like, with their students.
Mhm.
You know, get to know them, like, that's in and outside of school. So it's like with me, like, I will come into class and I was quiet, but it was like I would do my work and everything else, but stuff was still going at home. So I still kind of have that envy when I'm at school because, you know, nobody's really talking to me. You know, and I'm just like holding all this type of thing inside or whatever. Not that I really care like that, but it's still like, what would they expect out of me? Like, you know, you guys don't know what I got going on or anything like that. But the first thing you want to do is, oh, okay, let's get him out of school, or let's get him ISS. Like, not once did you guys ask, like, what's going on? Why did you act like that? Like, anything like that. And so, like, that's, like, my whole thing with, like, the school stuff. And that's why, like, I can't really just go any old where and talk to any old person, and I don't at all. Like, if I don't know you, I won't talk to you. If you didn't try to reach out to me, I still won't talk to you. Like, it's just that simple. And now, like, they're trying to now. I don't know why, but like, since I've been doing my own thing and like talking more, and they're hearing me talk, all of a sudden they want to know, okay, what was going on then? Like, how did you get up to now? And it's like, before you wasn't trying to reach out to me, but now you see I'm doing more positive things. Like, you want to be more concerned in my life, but before you weren't, type of thing. And so that's where it's just like, I want to go to a school knowing that, you know, I could come in, talk to my teacher if something's going on at home, you know, we can kind of work something out throughout the day, type of thing. But I feel like they should do that a lot more with their students, because at the end of the day, you still don't know what's going on at home with people.
I want to amplify something that Jamari said. What I heard you say is, I was a bad kid and I grew from that.
Yeah.
That's what brain science tells us. Brain science tells us that young people know boundaries, they test them, they make decisions, they do things, they look at the consequences, they do something else. That's how they grow and learn. And so I think as we get through into doing this work. And as we learn more about brain development and those sorts of things, our roadmap may take different turns. That's what maps do as the terrain changes. But what I think is very important is that we, as community members, understand and support young people as they grow and as they grow into making different decisions.
Yeah. Just as a matter of semantics, young people make bad decisions. There's not bad young people. There's poor decision making as part of adolescent brain development. This is why we're aiming to decriminalize adolescent behavior, because just young people do stupid stuff. But at no point in time in your life were you a bad kid. And so, and I know that it's just words, but when we say those things, we internalize them, right? And we begin to live into that as our past, so it begins to be a predictor of our future. So just strike that from your vocabulary. You were a kid that made some poor choices, but every person in this room was a kid that made poor choices. The only difference was the support they had around them.
Many of them were adults who made poor choices. Continue to make poor choices. Thank you all for being here. I'd encourage you to get people's contact information stuff while this group is all in the room together, because it's unusual we would all be able to get this on our schedules. And invite you to interview folks here. And thank you so much for your patience and your interest. I really appreciate it. Thank you.